A respected architect moves to a quiet town, ready to build the home he's dreamed of his entire life. But when his permit is quietly denied and excuses start piling up, he realizes he's not just fighting for a house. He's fighting a system that was never built for people like him. As the pushback grows from subtle to dangerous, one man refuses to back down. He gathers the evidence, finds unexpected allies, and uncovers a buried history of discrimination no one wanted to talk about. In a town where silence protects the powerful, he chooses to speak. And what begins as one man's dream becomes a reckoning that shakes the foundation of the whole community. Would you have stayed and fought back? Comment below and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it moved you. Jordan Taylor stood quietly on the edge of a quiet plot of land, hands in the pockets of his coat, eyes scanning the gentle slope that dipped toward a stand of tall pines. The air still held a hint of winter, but the ground was softening, and the breeze carried the smell of thawing earth. It was exactly the kind of place he'd always imagined building something permanent. The land had belonged to his Aunt Sylvia, a woman with sharp words and a warm heart who never did get around to building on it herself. When she passed, Jordan inherited the lot along with her old piano and a few boxes of family photos, but it was the land that stayed with him. Quiet, private, just outside Langley Ridge, a town too small to be on most maps but just close enough to the city to be called commutable. Jordan was an architect, mid-30s, even-keeled, soft-spoken, known more for his ability to get difficult projects through permitting boards than for showy design work. After years of city contracts and saving every penny he could, he was finally ready to design something for himself. Not a mansion, just a modest, light-filled home with clean lines and tall windows, somewhere peaceful, somewhere his name would be on the deed and his own hands in the framing if he could help it. He'd done everything right. Hired a local surveyor, cleared up a minor zoning classification, pulled environmental records, all the boxes were checked. The house would sit back from the road, wouldn't disrupt any trees, and fell well within local guidelines. He wasn't cutting corners. On Monday morning, he arrived at the Langley Ridge Municipal Services building carrying a leather folio of plans and documents. The front lobby smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. A receptionist nodded him toward a hallway without looking up. He made his way down to a narrow room with frosted glass in the door. The sign read, Planning and Development. Inside, the office looked like it hadn't changed since the 90s. Faded flag in the corner, metal filing cabinets dented at the bottom. Behind the desk sat a man with gray hair combed back and thick glasses sliding down his nose. He glanced up when Jordan stepped in. "You with maintenance?" "No, sir," Jordan replied with calm professionalism. "I'm here to submit a residential development application. My name's Jordan Taylor." The man didn't stand. He leaned back, looked Jordan up and down, then gave a nod that didn't mean much. "You're looking to build in Langley Ridge?" "Yes, I own parcel 473B off Birch Hollow Road." The man's brow furrowed like he recognized the lot but wasn't thrilled about it. He said, "That's right near the wetlands." "Correct, but I've had the lot assessed. The build meets all local and state codes." "Does it now?" he replied in a tone that suggested he doubted it, whether or not he had reason to. "Let's see the paperwork." Jordan laid the folio on the desk and began talking him through it. He didn't rush. He knew how these things worked. He kept his voice steady, avoided sounding like he was teaching or bragging, just facts presented clearly. When he was finished, he sat back and waited. The man didn't say anything right away. He flipped through a few pages, then leaned back and laced his fingers over his stomach. "I'm Craig Dalton," he finally said, "Senior Development Officer." Jordan extended a hand across the desk. Craig looked at it, then pretended not to see it and turned to the filing cabinet. "Listen, Mr. Taylor," he said, pulling open a drawer, "we get a lot of folks from the cities thinking they can come out here and shake things up. Bring in their big ideas, new materials, fancy designs. That's not really how we do things around here." Jordan kept his expression neutral. "I'm not trying to shake anything up, just trying to build a home on land that's already mine." "Well, we like to take our time with these things," Craig replied. "Real careful about what we approve." "I'm happy to follow the process," Jordan said, "as long as it's applied fairly." Craig said nothing to that. He took the folder, slid it into a drawer, and closed it with a thud. "You'll hear from me," he said. That was it. Jordan left the office without a receipt or confirmation. The clerk at the front desk didn't meet his eye when he passed her again. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, but the air felt colder. Back at the small rental cabin he was using while he sorted things out, Jordan pulled out his notebook and began writing. Just a date, a name. A note that he'd submitted the application. He didn't add how Craig looked at him or how he never shook his hand, but he remembered. He wasn't angry, not yet, just cautious. Jordan had grown up understanding that some people didn't need a reason to block you, that if you were calm, prepared, and meticulous, you gave them less to twist later. He worked too hard for this. If there was going to be a problem, he'd see it coming, and he'd be ready. That night, he FaceTimed his sister, Lena, and showed her a sketch of the main room with tall, west-facing windows. Big windows mean big energy bills, she said, half teasing. They're triple glazed, it's passive solar, Jordan said. I don't know what that means, Lena replied, but I love it. When do you break ground? As soon as the town gives the green light. She raised an eyebrow, that soon, huh? Jordan shrugged, it should be everything done, just paperwork now. But even as he said it, he felt something under the surface, like a hairline crack in a clean foundation. The next morning, he called the planning office to ask for a receipt. The woman on the line told him they didn't usually give those out unless something been approved. By the end of the week, there was still no update. The online permitting dashboard showed nothing filed under his name or the parcel number, so he drove back into town, asked to speak with Craig. This time, the front desk told him Craig wasn't in. No idea when he'd be back. Jordan stood there for a moment, then nodded and walked out. Across the street, a man in a camouflage hat paused while cleaning out the bed of his truck. He didn't wave, just stared. Jordan didn't flinch. He got into his car and made a mental note. This wasn't going to be simple. But then again, nothing worth building ever was. A week passed with no word. Jordan checked the town's permitting portal every morning. Still nothing. No updates, no confirmation of receipt. The system, simple and outdated, showed applications from others filed both before and after his visit, but not his. He called the office again on Tuesday, and the receptionist, same woman, same flat voice, told him Craig Dalton was reviewing it and that some applications take longer than others. She didn't explain why. When he asked if there was an average review time or if a formal tracking number could be issued, she repeated that the process wasn't like in the city and that things were done differently here. Jordan wrote it all down. It was the end of March now. Snowmelt had left shallow puddles in the corners of the lot. He visited again, walking the perimeter in boots, brushing aside broken branches and old brambles. He stood where the front door would be, where the back porch would face west, and tried to stay focused on the end goal. But the silence from the office wasn't just a delay. It was the beginning of something colder. 2 days later, Jordan got a letter in the mail, not from the planning department, but from the Office of Public Works. It said there was a concern about his parcel boundary line. A neighboring property owner had filed a notice, questioning whether the southern edge of Jordan's lot extended too far. The neighbor wasn't named. Jordan looked over the letter 3 times, confused. The parcel had been surveyed just last month by a licensed local firm. He had signed sealed documentation with clear boundary lines. He called the number on the letter and was told to contact Craig Dalton directly, since he'd be the one handling anything related to development implications. When Jordan asked if he could get a meeting to clarify the situation, he was told Craig was not available this week. No one offered to schedule anything. The next morning, Jordan drove into town and walked into the office without calling first. The receptionist looked up with mild surprise. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Dalton," Jordan said calmly. She gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He's in a meeting." "I'll wait." He sat down. She didn't offer coffee or water. After 20 minutes, a door creaked open down the hall. Craig Dalton stepped out alone, adjusting his collar. His eyes landed on Jordan, and something in his expression shifted, flat, uninterested, cautious. "Mr. Taylor," he said, walking slowly over. "Wasn't expecting you. I've received 2 notices now, one about a boundary concern and one about an application delay. I thought it best to come in." Craig didn't invite him back to the office. He stood in the hallway, blocking the way. "There've been some issues raised, things we need to look into. My surveyor already confirmed the boundary lines. The report was included in my application. Some folks think it doesn't match the county's older maps," Craig said. "You've got to understand this is a small town. We don't just rubber stamp things here." "I'm not asking for a rubber stamp," Jordan said, his voice even. "I'm asking for the same process anyone else would receive." Craig's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you suggesting you're being treated unfairly?" "I'm saying I'd like a formal response to my application, and I'd like to know what steps are being taken to investigate these so-called issues." Craig gave a tight smile. "Well, sometimes it's best to take a step back and think about whether a project's really the right fit for the area." Jordan looked at him for a long moment. "I appreciate your time." He turned and walked out. Back at the cabin, Jordan opened his notebook. He wrote down every word he could remember, noting the time, the look on Craig's face, the way he refused to give direct answers. Then he sent an email to his surveyor requesting an updated digital copy of the parcel map. He included a short summary of what had occurred and asked if the firm had dealt with Dalton before. Within hours, the surveyor responded. The boundary was clean, he confirmed. No errors. As for Craig, he'd dealt with him before. Tends to be picky with some people, the email read. Especially outsiders wouldn't take it personally. But Jordan did take it seriously. That weekend, a white pickup truck drove slowly past the lot while Jordan was measuring out stake lines. The driver didn't wave, just stared, then turned around at the cul-de-sac and passed again, slower this time. Jordan watched the truck disappear, then went back to his work. The next morning, there was a complaint filed with the town office. A noise complaint claimed there was unauthorized equipment and disturbance on the lot. Jordan had been using a tape measure and a notepad. Another visit to the planning office yielded no answers. Craig wasn't in, again. Jordan stopped trying to go through the front door. Instead, he began reaching sideways. He remembered a woman named Megan Lewis, someone he'd worked with years ago during a public park redevelopment. She'd been a board member at a local nonprofit, and more importantly, she now served on Langley Ridge's town council. He sent her a short message, just an update. A few key details, nothing accusatory, just concern about inconsistencies in the permitting process. She replied the same day, friendly, curious. Would you be open to meeting in person? She wrote. This sounds familiar. They met at a coffee shop 2 towns over. Megan was in her early 40s, sharp in both tone and wardrobe, and she listened closely as Jordan laid out the timeline. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. You're not the first one, she said. She told him about 2 others, both LGBTQ, who'd tried to develop property in the area over the past few years and faced similar stall tactics. Both had walked away eventually. Too much resistance, too many delays. Nothing ever written down that could be proved. I don't know if Craig's the type to call someone names to their face, Megan said, but I've seen how he operates, passive roadblocks, technical concerns. Never quite enough to catch him with. Jordan asked her if she could help. Megan said she couldn't interfere directly with permit review, but she could request records. She could sit in on future meetings. She could watch. He thanked her. That night, Jordan returned to the cabin and opened his notebook again. He added the new names, wrote down everything Megan had said. He printed out every email, scanned each complaint, saved copies to 2 hard drives, not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't naive. Craig Dalton had made a mistake. He picked the wrong person to block. The first official denial came in a plain white envelope, stamped with the Langley Ridge seal and nothing else. Inside, a single-page letter said Jordan's building permit had been formally rejected due to nonconformance with Municipal Code 14B12, encroachment near protected vegetation. Jordan read it twice, then 3 more times. He sat back in the cabin's chair, letting the words settle. He already knew 14B12. He reviewed it carefully before submitting his plans. The code had to do with tree preservation, requiring a 20-foot buffer between construction zones and any native trees deemed ecologically significant. He pulled up his site plan and traced the buffers again with a ruler. Every tree had been accounted for. He'd even marked 1 pine on the western edge for relocation based on the arborist's recommendation. He knew the plans were clean. This wasn't about trees. It was about pushing him out without saying it outright. Jordan didn't yell. He didn't curse. He opened his laptop, pulled up the survey files, and drafted a reply to Craig Dalton's office asking for clarification, supporting documentation, and a copy of any inspection report that might justify the claim. No one responded. He called twice that week. The receptionist put him on hold the first time. The second time, she said Craig was working remotely for a few days. No one else could speak to the permit. Later that afternoon, a neighbor walked by while Jordan was setting up new stakes on the edge of the lot. A woman in her 60s with a knit scarf and stiff posture. She stopped a few yards away and said, "You're the one trying to build here, right?" Jordan wiped his hands on his jeans. "That's right, I own the parcel." She looked at him for a long moment. This road been quiet for years. Folks around here like things the way they are. Jordan nodded. "I'm not trying to change anything, just build a house." She sniffed, then walked on without saying anything else. The next morning, 2 orange flags appeared on the edge of his lot. No note, no explanation, just flag stakes planted near the base of 2 trees like a warning. He documented everything, photos, dates, times. Then he emailed Megan Lewis again. By now, she had begun digging into public records related to other permit denials over the past 5 years. 2 cases jumped out immediately, one involving a lesbian couple who had tried to open a bed and breakfast just outside town, another involving a trans man who wanted to add a garage to his property. Both applications had been denied over vague code infractions that didn't hold up to scrutiny. Neither had fought back. Both had quietly withdrawn and moved on. Megan shared this with Jordan over coffee in the same out-of-town cafe, and her voice was tight with frustration. "This is how he does it," she said. "He makes it sound like it's just the rules, like he's just the messenger, but he selectively enforces, applies different standards depending on who's asking." "Is anyone else seeing this?" Jordan asked. "Not officially," Megan replied, "but some of us are starting to pay attention." Jordan took a sip of his coffee, then leaned back and opened his notebook. "Let's make it official." That weekend, he updated his plans to include a detailed addendum addressing every point raised in the rejection letter, even the ones that didn't make sense. He included annotated photos of the trees, new arborist notes, a letter from the surveyor, and a revised site sketch. He printed 2 copies and mailed them certified, one to the planning office and one to the municipal clerk. He also dropped off a 3rd copy in person, documenting the exact time with a timestamped selfie in front of the office door. Craig wasn't there. A new notice arrived 3 days later. This time, it wasn't about permits. It was a citation, unauthorized development activity. It claimed Jordan had disturbed soil and vegetation without a permit, referencing the staked flags near the trees. Jordan sat at the table, slowly rereading the form, then shook his head. He hadn't touched the trees, he hadn't dug or disturbed anything. Someone was fabricating violations. He called Megan again. "This is coordinated," he told her. "It's not just a delay tactic anymore. They're trying to build a case to revoke my eligibility entirely." Megan didn't disagree. She sounded tired but focused. "I'm going to bring in someone I trust, a legal contact at the State Housing Equity Office. She'll want to talk to you." The next morning, Jordan spoke to a lawyer named Erin Cho over Zoom. She specialized in housing discrimination and had a calm, analytical demeanor. He walked her through everything, every letter, every call, every flag stake. Erin didn't interrupt. When he finished, she leaned forward slightly. "You're doing everything right," she said, "and I want you to keep doing it. No confrontations, no escalation, just documentation. I'll help you draft a formal response and prepare a record request under state transparency laws." Jordan exhaled slowly. Good. That weekend, while going over old emails, Jordan found one from a local contractor he'd reached out to months earlier. He called the man again to follow up about possibly prepping the site. The contractor hesitated. "Oh yeah, I remember now. You're the one doing the modern build-out on Birch Hollow." "That's right. Look, I'd love to help, but I've already got a bunch of stuff lined up. Real busy right now." There was something off in his tone. Jordan didn't push it, just thanked him and hung up. He was starting to understand that this wasn't just Craig Dalton, this was Langley Ridge, and it had its ways. Still, Jordan kept going. He made copies of everything. He filed requests. He started gathering witness statements, even brief ones, from the surveyor, the arborist, and Megan. He created a shared digital folder, backed it up twice, and logged every interaction. And quietly, without fanfare, something started shifting. The local paper, the Ridge Ledger, published a small editorial titled "When Fairness Gets Lost in the Process." It didn't name names, but it quoted a source close to the council, who expressed concern about how development permits were being inconsistently applied. It was just a few hundred words, but people read it. Jordan noticed more eyes on him in town now, not just from the curious, from the watchful. Another truck slowed down in front of his lot, this time with 2 men in the cab. One pointed. They didn't get out, but they didn't drive away quickly either. Jordan stood his ground. That evening, he updated his log again. He started a new section, separate from the rest, labeled Patterns. It had just 2 entries for now, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way. The first time Jordan saw Megan Lewis stand up in a town council meeting, it wasn't dramatic. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't call anyone out, she just asked a few very precise questions about zoning code enforcement consistency. Then she sat down and let the silence do the rest. It was a small moment, but Jordan recognized its weight. She was testing the water, seeing who else might stir. That same night, Megan forwarded Jordan an internal document from the town's planning archives, a list of approved permit applications over the past 5 years. It wasn't illegal to access, it was public record, but no one ever really looked at it closely. Jordan did. He spent the evening going through each line one by one, addresses, parcel IDs, approval dates, brief notes on decisions. It didn't take long before a pattern started to show itself. Applicants who lived in Langley Ridge for longer than 10 years, approved within weeks. Applications flagged for delays, most came from newcomers. 3 of them had names Jordan recognized from Megan's earlier mentions, and then there were the rejections. The 2 other LGBTQ+ applicants, both denied within 3 months. No further notes. Vague citations like community compatibility concerns or insufficient documentation. Jordan pulled those cases and added them to a folder labeled Comparable Denials. This was no longer just about his house. It was about a pattern, and he was going to prove it. A few days later, Megan arranged a quiet lunch with Aaron Cho, the lawyer from the Housing Equity Office, and a second guest, Luis Menendez, a retired city planner who now consulted on discriminatory practices in land use policy. They met at Megan's home, out on the edge of town where the roads were still gravel and the neighbors still nodded politely but didn't say much. Jordan brought printed files, a USB drive, and a spiral notebook that was starting to fray at the corners. Lewis was quiet through most of the meeting. He listened as Jordan laid everything out, the delays, the denials, the fabricated citations. He asked a few technical questions. Then he sat back and whistled low. "This smells familiar," Lewis said. "I've seen this before, small-town permitting officers using vague language in the code to block undesirables. They never say it outright, but they'll kill your plans with process." Aaron nodded. "They know how to dance just close enough to the line that it doesn't look illegal, but when you document it over time across cases, it stops looking like bureaucracy. It starts looking like intent." Jordan didn't smile. He didn't feel like celebrating, but something inside him settled, like a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying was finally being passed to steadier hands. Lewis leaned forward. "We can help, but you're going to have to be exact. Every communication, every citation, every time you were told, 'Not today, we need it.' The more objective, the better." "I've got all of it," Jordan said quietly. The group stayed another 2 hours. They made a list of action items, request town email archives, file a Freedom of Information petition, locate previous applicants who had similar experiences. By the end of the meeting, Jordan had more than a folder. He had a team. That same week, Megan quietly introduced Jordan to someone else, a former intern from the town planning department named Rachel. She was in her 20s, had since moved away, and worked remotely as a GIS analyst. Over coffee, she shared that during her time with the department, she noticed Craig Dalton would keep 2 sets of files, one official, one informal. The second set wasn't on the shared server, she explained, just in a folder on his personal hard drive. He called it his gut check folder, stuff he didn't want entered into the system until he'd made a call. Jordan blinked. "What kind of stuff?" "Notes," she said, "little ones. I saw one once. It was about a couple trying to renovate a property near the church. Craig wrote, 'Too flashy, don't like the look of them.' It wasn't even about zoning, just tone." "Do you think he's doing that now?" "I'd bet money on it," Rachel replied, "but you'll need someone inside to confirm." Aaron listened to this update over a call and suggested an investigator, someone with quiet credentials, good at sniffing out patterns in internal systems. She would make the contact. Meanwhile, Megan began making her own waves. She brought up questions during public meetings about code enforcement patterns, about inconsistencies in how long applications took to process. She never mentioned Jordan by name, but everyone at that table knew who she was talking about. Craig sat across from her with his arms crossed, saying very little. But Jordan noticed his tone change after that. The passive coldness gave way to subtle barbs. He started sending letters referencing escalating concerns about Jordan's project, claimed to have received anonymous tips about improper material storage on site. No proof, just words, enough to gum up the works. But this time Jordan was ready. He photographed everything. No materials on site, no construction activity. Just flagged stakes and a man walking the perimeter with a clipboard. He submitted his response through Aaron, complete with a notarized statement from the surveyor and time-stamped images from his phone. The town had no choice but to acknowledge receipt. That night, Jordan received a call from an unknown number. He let it go to voicemail. The message was short, a man's voice, slight twang. "You should think hard about whether this house is really worth all this trouble." Jordan didn't react. He didn't call back. He forwarded the message to Aaron, saved a copy to the cloud, and added a note to his logbook. April 22, anonymous voicemail, forwarded to legal. The line had officially been crossed, but Jordan wasn't rattled. He was building something stronger than a house now. He was laying the foundation for truth. A few days later, he got word from Lewis. The state housing office was opening a formal inquiry into Langley Ridge's permitting practices. It wasn't public yet, but it was real. Jordan stood on the lot that evening as the sun dropped below the tree line. The shadows were long, the earth was cool. But there was a stillness that felt less like a warning and more like a breath held just before release. He didn't speak, didn't move, he just stood there steady as concrete. By early May, something had shifted. It wasn't loud, it wasn't obvious, but Jordan could feel it like a hairline fracture in concrete, invisible at first, then slowly widening until light starts to slip through. It began with an envelope, not from the town this time, but from a woman named Carla Jennings. She lived 3 blocks from Birch Hollow Road. She wasn't someone Jordan had met before, but she'd read about him, quietly between the lines of a blog post Megan had written for a local housing equity group. Carla's letter wasn't long, but it was clear. She and her partner had tried to build a duplex on her late mother's lot 2 years ago. They were denied for incompatible use. She'd assumed they just hadn't played the politics right, but now, reading about Jordan's fight, she saw the pattern. She attached a scanned copy of her denial letter and a hand-drawn sketch of the layout they'd submitted. The plans weren't radical, just practical. She offered to testify if it ever came to that. Jordan read her letter twice, then once more slowly. He added her file to a folder labeled Testimonies. 2 days later, a second envelope arrived. This one from an older man named Harold Lindsay, who used to own a hardware store on Main Street before retiring last year. His note was even shorter. Saw what they did to you. Same thing happened to my nephew in '08. Dalton buried him in paper until he gave up. I've got the records. Let me know if they'll help. Jordan sat in silence after reading that one. The pattern was no longer emerging, it was speaking. Aaron and Lewis, working in tandem, began to build what they called a systemic discrimination matrix. It sounded cold, technical because it had to be. Each case added to it made the argument sharper. The more Jordan read, the more the strategy came into focus. Craig Dalton didn't destroy people all at once. He wore them down bit by bit, delay by delay, technicality by technicality. He never yelled, never wrote slurs, just forced people to choose between endless battles and simply walking away. But Jordan wasn't walking, he was digging deeper. With Megan's help, Jordan submitted a second formal request to the town clerk. He wanted access to communications regarding his parcel. All emails, memos, handwritten notes, anything where his name or address was mentioned. The clerk, nervous but professional, agreed to the request. She said she'd need 2 weeks. Jordan said he'd wait. That same week, Megan forwarded a curious email from a contact in the county assessor's office. It was about parcel 473B, Jordan's land. Craig Dalton had made an internal request to reevaluate the zoning designation of the area surrounding Jordan's lot. His reasoning: environmental protection review due to increased development interest. It wasn't official, not yet, but if approved, it could freeze all construction in that area. Jordan took a deep breath and called Aaron. "This is retaliation," he said. Aaron didn't disagree. "He's getting nervous, that's good, but it also means he might escalate." Jordan understood. He wasn't afraid of Craig. He was afraid of silence, of this being allowed to go on because no one ever said it plainly, so he started saying it plainly. With Aaron's help, he drafted a statement. It wasn't angry, it wasn't even accusatory. It was a personal account of the steps he had taken, the delays he'd faced, the denials without basis, and the quiet support he was beginning to receive from others. Megan published it on a local news blog the next morning. They didn't lead with race, they didn't lead with sexuality, they led with facts, dates, quotes from rejection letters, a pattern. The blog didn't go viral, but it didn't have to. It made it back to the council. Craig Dalton didn't say anything publicly, but 2 days later the town office closed early for maintenance. And by Monday morning, the website's permit portal had been temporarily disabled for updates. Lewis saw right through it. "They're scrambling," he told Jordan, "trying to clean house before you kick the door in." That same day, Jordan received a visit. It was late afternoon. He was back at the lot, measuring out possible driveway paths with a surveyor who'd agreed to help on the record this time. A Navy sedan pulled up. Out stepped a man in a crisp shirt with a town seal on the chest and a clipboard in hand. "Inspection," the man said simply. "Scheduled with who?" Jordan asked. The man looked down, fumbled for a name, then said, "Craig Dalton." Jordan didn't argue. He let the man walk the lot, but he recorded everything. Phone in hand, calm, professional. He asked clear questions, noted vague answers, and followed up with a written summary of the interaction emailed to both Aaron and Megan that night. 2 days later, he found out that the inspector had filed a report listing potential subsurface drainage issues. The recommendation: additional engineering reports at Jordan's cost. Jordan didn't flinch, he'd seen it coming. He contacted an independent civil engineer who agreed to conduct a neutral site assessment and document everything. Megan helped pay the deposit out of a discretionary fund she oversaw through the town's Community Development Council. The results came back clean: no drainage issues, no instability, no foundation concerns, just a lot of mud and one man determined to stop a house from being built on it. That weekend, the town council held a public meeting. Megan, as always, stayed composed. But this time she didn't ask soft questions. She brought up names, cases, dates. She said the words selective enforcement and pattern of obstruction. Craig Dalton sat in silence as she read from the data Jordan had helped compile. He didn't interrupt, he didn't even look up. Jordan sat in the back of the room, he didn't speak, but others did. Carla stood and shared her story, so did Harold, and 2 others Jordan hadn't even met, one a teacher, the other a retired nurse. They weren't loud, they were clear. The meeting ended with no official decision, but the temperature had changed. For the first time, Jordan saw Craig glance toward him, not with disdain but with calculation. Something was coming apart. Not Jordan, not the house. The foundation Craig had spent years building under the cover of quiet rules and unwritten codes, it was cracking. And once a crack spreads far enough, there's only one thing left to do. Tear it down and start again. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, the kind of day no one expected much from. Overcast skies hung low above Langley Ridge, and the air smelled like wet mulch and old pavement. The town hall lights clicked on early that day, bright against the gloom as people filtered in slow at first, then steadily. Jordan arrived 10 minutes early and sat near the front, not to be seen but to hear clearly. He wore a simple navy blazer, no tie, pressed slacks. His expression was calm, neutral, practiced. Megan sat beside him, tablet in hand. Aaron was one row behind, dressed with quiet authority. Lewis arrived a few minutes later and gave Jordan a reassuring nod. The room was fuller than anyone had expected, not just the usual council regulars, not just retirees or zoning enthusiasts. There were families, teenagers, a few reporters from the local press, and even some faces Jordan didn't recognize, neighbors from Birch Hollow who'd never once spoken to him, now sitting stiffly in folding chairs, eyes on the front of the room. Craig Dalton entered from the side door just before the meeting began. His gait was slow, his face unreadable. He wore his usual button-down shirt and khakis, but his posture lacked its usual confidence. He didn't look toward Jordan, didn't look at anyone. Council Chairwoman Dorothy Keyes opened the session with a roll call and a dry reading of the agenda. Item 3, Review and Reconsideration of Development Application Denial, Parcel 473B. Mr. Taylor, she said, her voice clipped but polite, you may begin. Jordan stood and walked to the podium with a quiet steadiness. No rush, no apology. He clicked on the small projector beside the podium and brought up a clean, black and white site plan. My name is Jordan Taylor, he began. I am the sole owner of Parcel 473B. I submitted a development application on March 18. Since then, I have received 3 separate denials. Each cites different reasons, none of which are supported by code or by evidence. He paused, let the silence settle. I'm not here tonight to ask for special treatment. I'm asking for the same treatment every other resident is entitled to. He walked through the timeline: submission, delays, the lack of a receipt, the first fabricated complaint, the zoning excuse, then the drainage citation. For each point, he brought up supporting evidence, emails, photos, third-party assessments. He referenced code directly, reading slowly and clearly. He never raised his voice. When he reached the citation for disturbing protected vegetation, he pulled up the timestamp photos he'd taken the day before the complaint was filed, images showing no activity on the lot except for survey stakes. This is not about trees, it never was, he said. Murmurs rippled through the room. Someone shifted loudly in their seat, a cough echoed from the back. Jordan continued. This is a pattern, one that I've experienced firsthand and one that others in this town have experienced before me. He clicked to the next slide, a list of 7 names, just first names and last initials, accompanied by dates of application and short reasons for denial. Megan had helped format the graphic, clean, unemotional. These are individuals whose applications were delayed or denied for reasons similar to mine. Many of them are members of the LGBTQ+ community. Some are people of color, all were new to this town. Someone from the back said quietly, damn. Jordan paused and looked toward the council. I ask that my permit be reviewed by an independent reviewer, as provided for under Municipal Ordinance 1022. I also ask that the council initiate an external review of the planning department's discretionary practices dating back 5 years. He didn't thank them, he didn't smile, he simply nodded and stepped away. For a few seconds no one moved, then Megan stood. She walked to the podium and spoke clearly, firmly. Council members, as a sitting member of this body, I support Mr. Taylor's request. I've seen enough inconsistencies in our records to justify a full review. She didn't present evidence, not yet, her authority was her evidence. After Megan sat, a tall man with silver hair rose from the middle of the room. Harold Lindsay, former business owner, lifelong resident. I've been here 57 years, he said. I watched this town grow from a few storefronts to what it is now, and I've seen this kind of thing before. My nephew tried to build out past Ridgeview. Craig shut him down with concerns that never existed. We thought it was just bad luck. I see now it was. He sat down slowly. Next, Carla Jennings stood, then Rachel, then 2 others, each stepping forward with short, clear statements. No speeches, just confirmation. Craig sat motionless. He hadn't looked up once. Finally, the chairwoman spoke. Mr. Dalton, would you like to respond? Craig rose and walked to the podium. His hands were clasped in front of him, his face pinched. I have followed the letter of the law in every decision I've made as Senior Development Officer. If someone feels slighted, that's unfortunate, but my responsibility is to protect this town. He looked up briefly, eyes scanning the council, then the audience. They were no longer with him. I reject the idea that I have discriminated against anyone. He stepped back without saying more. Megan leaned over and whispered something to the chairwoman. Then the council members conferred quietly. After a moment, Dorothy Keyes adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. We're placing an immediate hold on all discretionary decisions made by Mr. Dalton relating to development permits over the last 6 months. We will appoint a third-party planner to review Mr. Taylor's application and make a formal recommendation within 30 days. Murmurs filled the room. Craig looked stunned. Jordan sat still. It wasn't over, not yet, but the balance had shifted. The room knew it, the walls knew it. As the meeting adjourned, a few people came up to shake Jordan's hand, quiet words, gentle thanks, others just nodded on their way out. Megan looked over at him as the room emptied. "You kept your composure," she said. "I had to," Jordan replied. Aaron approached with a quiet smile. That wasn't just a hearing, that was a turning point. Outside, the clouds had begun to lift. The parking lot glistened from a recent drizzle, but the air was finally dry. Jordan looked out across the lot and toward the road that led back to his parcel. It was still waiting, but so was he. The letter arrived in early June, official town letterhead, crisp language, a single paragraph signed by the newly appointed third-party planner. Jordan's permit had been approved in full, no conditions, no further delays. He read it once, then again. Then he folded it neatly and slid it into a file folder already thick with months of documentation, photos, notes, and voice memos. He didn't celebrate, not right away. He just sat quietly at the table of his rented cabin, fingers resting on the edge of the paper like he wasn't quite ready to let go of the fight. Outside, the trees rustled softly. Summer had come early that year. He called Megan first. She picked up on the first ring. "They approved it," he said simply. "I saw," she replied. "Town website updated 20 minutes ago, you okay?" "I think so," Jordan said. "Feels quiet." "You earned quiet," she told him. Aaron called next, offering her congratulations and letting him know the state's inquiry into Langley Ridge's planning department had expanded. Craig Dalton had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal ethics review. "They're calling it procedural irregularities," she said, "but you and I both know what it really was." Jordan nodded. "You think he'll face real consequences?" "I think the wall he hid behind for years finally cracked," she replied. "And I think a lot of people are walking through now." By the end of the week, Jordan had already lined up a contractor, one he trusted, one who hadn't flinched when Jordan said he wanted everything in writing with digital timestamps and photo updates. They walked the lot together, this time without interruption, without cold stares from passing trucks or sudden citations taped to trees. Jordan stood at the center of the space where the foundation would go. He closed his eyes for a moment and breathed in the stillness. This land wasn't just his anymore. It was his on record. He broke ground 2 weeks later, surrounded by a small crowd of friends, neighbors, and quiet supporters. Megan brought lemonade, Carla brought cookies, even Harold showed up with a folding chair and a nod of approval. There were no speeches, no media, no grand declarations, just the steady hum of work beginning and Jordan holding the shovel for the ceremonial first dig. It felt heavy in his hands, familiar, earned. The first wall frame went up on a clear morning in July. Jordan stood beside the crew as they raised the timber, bolting it into place with practiced ease. There was a rhythm to the work, a kind of music in the lifting and hammering and securing. It was nothing like the stillness of the town office. Here, progress made a sound. In the evenings, he sat on the lot with a folding chair and a notebook, sketching trim details or adjusting window angles. Sometimes neighbors stopped by, not to complain, not to question, just to ask how it was going. One woman, whose name he hadn't known until now, brought over a jar of peach preserves and said, "My brother used to work with Craig. Always said he didn't like people who stood out. Sorry it took us this long to see it." Jordan accepted the jar with a soft thank you. In quiet moments, he thought about the others who hadn't made it this far, the couple from 2 years ago, the trans man who just wanted a garage, the people who left without fighting because they knew what fighting would cost. Jordan had stayed, and now the walls were rising. Inside the town hall, things were changing too. Megan had helped draft a new ordinance requiring an independent reviewer on all permit denials, and the council had passed it unanimously. Craig's name was no longer listed on the staff directory. Rumor had it he'd been asked to resign quietly to avoid a public hearing. No one denied the pattern anymore, they just didn't know how to defend it. The new town planner, a woman named Simone Reed, reached out to Jordan personally. She asked if he'd be willing to speak at a future public forum on fair housing access. He said he would. He didn't want revenge, he wanted reform. By August, the frame was finished. Roof sealed, windows in. Jordan walked through the empty shell of the home, listening to the sound of his own footsteps echoing off unfinished walls. He paused in what would become the living room facing west. The late sun poured in through tall glass panes exactly as he designed it. His phone buzzed. It was Lena calling on video. He turned the camera around and showed her the open floor plan, the staircase taking shape, the long hallway leading to what would be the music room. "Looks good, big brother," she said. "I still think the tile you picked is boring, but I'm proud of you." "Thanks," he said, smiling. "Still gonna help me move in." "You know it." By the end of September, the drywall was up, paint finished, fixtures installed. The house felt like it had always been there, like it belonged, because it did. On a warm fall afternoon, Jordan moved in. No ceremony, no ribbon, just a key turning in a lock, a door opening to light and quiet and space that no one could take from him. He unpacked the first box himself, books mostly, a few photo frames, and a small potted plant he'd kept alive through the entire process, its leaves stubbornly green no matter what. That evening he sat on the back porch watching the sky shift to amber. A breeze rustled the trees. Somewhere nearby a dog barked and a screen door slammed. Life as usual, but Jordan was still at peace. Not because the fight hadn't been real, but because he hadn't let it change who he was. Megan called later to let him know that a second town was now under review by the State Housing Board, another place Craig had consulted in his early years. "You started something," she said. "No," Jordan replied. "We did." She didn't argue. As the sun dipped below the pines, Jordan looked back at his house, his name on the deed, his fingerprints in the design, his story in every wall. Not just a structure, a statement. That people like him didn't just belong in places like Langley Ridge. They built them.